Habermas, people like Craig, people like Pierce are saying, there are some forms of living together that are better than others. There are some forms of society, and there are some truths, even if they're not transcendent truths, ultimate truths, there are some truths that are better than others. So we need to recover social life through democratic communication processes. So Habermas writes a book called Theory of Communicative Action, where he argues that communication done properly is the way we can establish agreed upon social structures and live together. Barnett Pierce talks about making new social worlds through cosmopolitan communication. So there's a whole movement here to try to do something in the face of this postmodern deconstruction of everything, Derrida and all of this. So what that leaves us with in communication studies is a bag full of different kinds of theories. We have over 300 theories of communication that apply to interpersonal relationships, media, organizations, groups. We have hundreds of theories. Some of them are out of the modern period. Some of them are out of the postmodern period. And some of them are out of the post-postmodern period. So, they're all going to look different. So that's where Craig's scheme will come and help us sort it out a little bit. Any thoughts or comments on this?
It's just so like the modern would be reflected in like Henry Ford's factories. The quickest way to produce the most stuff with the least money.
Right.
And then when the cost of that becomes apparent to enough people, then you have the
Right, you have your bureaucracy, your vertical pyramid structures, your Frederick Taylor scientific management, by time clock and all that stuff. And eventually the weakness of this becomes apparent, that it crashes personally. It doesn't. Humans can't live in this mechanistic world. So you have your postmodern thing, which goes at, hate Ashbury's tree, starts there and blasts into the whole United States, and everything is up for grabs, everything is non-rational,
These movements usually start in universities, or do they start?
Well, they start in different places at different times. So your literary people started this some other time. So it starts in different places. Art, it started even earlier, I think. Right? I don't have all those dates straight. But like in art, so it, not necessarily the universities, but among artists, among poets, among people who are kind of the social frogs. I don't mean that in a bad way. Yeah, they're the people who sense things first. So they start to say it, and then eventually it comes along to the universities, and then it comes along. But that doesn't mean to say that modernists still didn't continue. There's a whole modernist thing going on, and there's still a whole postmodernist thing going on, and then now there's a postmodernist thing that's very much aligned to modernism, because they still believe that there's a hierarchy of value. There are things that are better. It's better to be humane than to be inhumane. And in postmodernism, you don't have any basis for saying that. Everything is just constructed out of discourse. Foucault said that there's no such thing as an individual. Individuals don't exist. They're only nodes in networks of discourse. And so it's not, we don't speak language, language speaks us. That's the way they said it. So you don't have any humans anymore, so the author's dead. There's no humans. But like one of my professors at Temple used to say, but you got to get up and eat breakfast in the morning. So after you read all this stuff, put it aside, put it on the shelf, and go eat breakfast. Because you got to live. So, but all this is to say, you're going to run into different theories that are out of different places here.
Is there a word for like a combination I mean, I know you're doing it on a timeline, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of just like thinking like scientific or qualitative and quantitative, for like a mix. Is it like triangulation? Or like what
Yeah, well, do qualitative and quantitative research. Yeah, there are mixed methods. It's called mixed method research that's done. And really, they feed into each other. The ideal thing is to do an ethnographic or a qualitative study that gives you some hypotheses that you test quantitatively, and then that feeds back maybe into some new qualitative research.
You know, when I was doing theater, I had this, always a day gig, and one of them was working at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I never made that much money again in my life. But anyway, I was a doorman, and they sorted out that it was kind of like the late 80s, and this postmodern thing was going on, and they said, you know what, the expert on being a doorman is the doorman, it's not the manager. And so all of a sudden they started asking, the valets and the doormen, well, why are there dings in the doors all the time?
Right.
How can we have less flat tires? And, the reason
Right.
they did that was because they started making more money or losing less
Right.
money.
Yeah.
And that's when you had that combination of things.
All right, you turn this over. Organizationally, you get what's called network management, lattice management. You turn the pyramid upside down. Or you end up with a organism. You think of the organization as an organism that has relationships and grows as each part fields changes. So you can move all through organizational management styles too that relate to this. But a lot of hybrids, I think that's part of what you're talking about, a lot of hybrid ways of structuring this. But the whole point of this is just to say that comm theory goes all the way back to Aristotle, who's operating in this world. And he's beginning to talk about logic and reason and studying communication. But when we read Gorgias, you'll find references to myths and traditional ways of understanding communication. And one of the articles I'm not going to read is the spiritualist tradition that has to do with the whole sense of a whole spiritual dimension to what goes into communication. So you can read that one if you'd like. It's a very good article, but I didn't assign it. But so we pick up theories from Aristotle. We pick up theories from Augustine, St. Augustine in 400 AD. We pick up, then we have scientific theories of propaganda studies and human teaching speech, public speaking. And then we hit theories of group process and organizational dynamics. So our field in some sense is young. I mean, it's very old in some ways, but it's very young, and that some of our fields, like organizational communication, have just come into existence in the last number of decades as a field of study. So your org comm, and PR is even younger yet as a field. I mean, there have been people, practitioners, but the books have been not based on theories as much as someone did something successful, they wrote it down, now everyone else does it that way. So that's not necessarily an understanding way, it's a technique. Aristotle talked about three kinds of knowledge. You have your techne, what are the three kinds? Does anybody remember this? And then the phronesis. I think this is your logos. So you have three kinds of knowledge. Anyway, this is close enough. You have your eternal knowledge of the real, Plato's ideals. So there's knowledge of that kind of truth, eternal truth. Then there's knowledge of how to make a chair or how to build a bridge. That's another kind of knowledge. And then there's a phronesis, which is your wisdom kind of knowledge, where you understand that the same thing may not work in every situation. And there's sometimes you do it, sometimes you don't. And so you have this kind of a knowledge. And of course, if you have a person working for you who's only a technician, they can't adapt to a change because they don't have the wisdom. So a lot of PR, the criticism of PR has been that it's been a technique and not a field of study. It's been, do these 5 things if this happens. So now PR is starting to move into theoretical. The Grunigs have given PR a theoretical base. And so there's a lot of new literature about try to understand the dynamics of PR instead of just practicing it as a techne. All right. Any other thoughts? Questions? I mean, that was pretty theoretical, right?
Did you say that modernism kind of calls the tune, though? I mean, that they will include those other things so long as there's sort of a benefit, whereas I don't know that it works the other way.
Well, yeah, the problem right now is that modernism gets the money in the university,
Well,
right? I mean, where's the investment of money generally? It's in the hard sciences and in fields that are scientifically respectable, not the humanities and not the arts, right? So some of it, you know, is actually crude politics at times that the communication studies departments have worked scientifically to validate themselves in the university politics.
Well, look at rock and roll. I mean, you know, the 1960s thing got co-opted by by the early 70s. It was done. You know what I mean?
Right, and it became a commodity.
Right.
See, this is the critical theory. We'll talk about the commodification of anything. So any, like punk, you know, started off as a one thing, and then it was commodified, and it became you could buy it, which was, you know, it was supposed to be just, you didn't buy it. So it becomes a commodity, so it co-opts everything. And people like Habermas, there's a lot of, in critical theory, there's a lot of criticism of this process and communicative ways of trying to preserve the what Habermas calls the life world. Habermas says that the problem we're facing today in late capitalism, so this is a Marxist stream theory, is that the life world has been colonized by instrumental rationality. How to do things, how to make things. When the life world is about how to have relationships and how to construct things of beauty instead of functionality. So as long as we're caught up in this instrumental rationality, the scientist is king because he knows how to make things and get things done. But what we need is the artists and the diplomats to be highly regarded who can create social worlds and aesthetic worlds. So that's a graduate level conversation about this. That's not the undergraduate version of this. All right, any other thoughts? This is all just background though. It's all, you know, it's all just so you understand stuff about where your theory is coming from, how come they look different from each other. But
What's your favorite?
what's my favorite?
You have to have. You know you do.
I'm a Habermasian communitarian. Because I'm a rhetorician. My degree is in rhetorical studies. So my question is, how can people with different moral perspectives live together in community? That's my communication question. And that's why I'm on a national dialogue committee, you know, and so my question is, how can people learn to talk together in ways that they can deal with their differences and still live in a collaborative society? So I like postmodernism. You know, I mean, this was interesting, and modernism is great because it gives me my Mac computer, you know. So, but we, in the end of the deal, we got to figure out how we're going to live together in this insane world. So that's kind of my favorite. favorite.
You like sit there and listen to them fight on talk radio
What's
for like
that?
hours and love it? Do you like sit there and listen to them fight?
No, I don't. I can't stand that because they're idiots. They're not practicing the kinds of communication that will lead to productive
I was listening to my
social
dad
life.
today, and like the one they just hang up on the other people sometimes if they don't
Yes.
know what they're saying. Like they scream
Yeah.
until who's louder, and then they hang up.
Now, Habermas has a whole theory of how democratic societies should gather people for conversation and what the conditions are for ideal speech situations and how we can form transcendent truth, not eternal truths, but transcendent truths. Recover it. So if we ever get into that, we'll go. And then my next favorite thing is systems theory with Peter Senge in Fifth Discipline book. So, all right. So let me just preview the 7 traditions for you, so you're oriented to them, and then we'll go, and we'll be done. All right. So just to think about it, we'll start with rhetoric. The rhetorical tradition does go back to Aristotle. It actually goes back further than Aristotle to Plato and the sophists. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the sophists. But we had people who were teachers of speech and a big debate about whether they should be paid or not for that. So this is 400 BCE. They're debating this. So Aristotle writes a book, the first book we have about speaking or public speaking, and he calls it the Rhetoric. And so that's the name of the book. And it talks about persuasion, it talks about ethos, pathos, and logos, the character of a person, the emotions that are stirred, the rationality that's applied to an argument. But he also has a whole dimension that is not just about persuasion, but is about public deliberation. That when a city-state has to decide whether to go to war or whether to build more ships or whether to build roads, how do you debate that? So there's a whole public deliberation dimension to rhetorical studies. There's a whole social dimension to it. So rhetoric is one of the traditions. And there are still people who are rhetoricians. Little John's wife, Karen Foss, would consider herself a rhetorician. She has a theory of how people with highly different perspectives on life can learn to appreciate each other in new ways. So she calls it invitational rhetoric. And she tells a story about a hunter and a PETA person, having a conversation. And so we'll look at Foss's invitational rhetoric at some point. So anyway, rhetoric is a whole thing about how people live together in society. Then, like I said, you have your socio-psychological. Now this is our version of psychology. So we're in psychology, you're asking about the individual and processes within the individual. So brain processes, cognitive things, what's going on internally in the person. Self-esteem, the cell, these kinds of things. So we ask questions about how do messages relate to those things? How do people construct messages? How do we accomplish this thing of creating a sentence? Where does that come from in the brain? What happens when people can't form sentences? What's going on for them?
That would be like more scientific.
That's very scientific. Yeah, the socio-psychological is built on hard science methodologies. And so these theories, like cognitive complexity, is one of these kind of theories where it says people have different amounts of language available to them to describe and interact with the world. And so some people are highly complex, they can make fine distinctions between things, and other people are simple. They say yes, no, black, white. They have low cognitive complexity. And one of the things we've discovered through research and communication studies is that children who grow up in a home where there is cognitively complex conversation between parents, guardians, whatever, family members, are more successful in business and in life because they're able to navigate complex situations more productively. And children who grow up in a cognitively simple environment where they're just told things all the time, it's yes, no, no explanations are given, no shades of meaning, they fail in life, and they reproduce cycles of failure in their children. So that's a communication finding. It's interesting. So that's a socio-psychological. Then we have our sociocultural, which is our version of sociology. So this gets at questions of how groups of people work together, peer pressure, how groups of people create meaning through shared cultural roles and speech codes that they follow. So it's not just the individual brain stuff or internal stuff. It's what's going on between groups of people. So we have theories that are sociocultural, like speech codes. So one of the things we'll study is Jerry Phillipson's work on Teamsterville. Any of you familiar with Teamsterville research? Jerry Phillipson did some pioneering communication studies work south of Chicago. He's lived for 3 years in a working class community of truck drivers doing ethnographic observation and describing the communication behaviors of these people. It's in that book, right. Yeah. And he found out that among that group of people, for men to solve problems together with others by talking doesn't happen. You don't talk about it. You use pressure or force or something. So it's a code built into that culture not to solve problems by talking. So that's useful knowledge. You know, that if there are groups that don't talk, that it's considered a sign of weakness to talk about solving a problem. So if we have a conflict over you putting your garbage on my steps or something, you know, or we can't talk about it. I can take my car out and run your garbage cans over, but I can't talk about it. Yeah. So sociocultural. Then we have cybernetic, which is your systems theories. Anybody know where cybernetic comes from? What the background of cybernetics is? The word cybernetics. It's actually an old Greek word, kubernesis, which was the person who steered the boat. So it's about control of systems. So it has to do with how is a system managed. And so the person who steered the boat was the kubernesis, the leader, the controller of the direction the boat went. So cybernetics asks, how do we control, how do we set systems that control things? So like if this room has a cybernetic system in its temperature, sort of, you know, that we have thermostats. When the temperature goes up, it turns this on. When it goes down, it turns this on. So this is a cybernetic control system to keep the temperature. Your body is a cybernetic control system. It wants to have a certain level of hydration. It wants to maintain a certain temperature. If you get too cold, you shiver to heat up. If you get too hot, you sweat to cool down. Your body is a system of things that work together to maintain a certain state. And in cybernetics, we call that homeostasis. So the question is then, do people communicate in ways that control and maintain stability? And how does that happen? So if you have an alcoholic family, for instance, where you have a child who is keeping family secrets, and that child decides to try to change that, their pressure is applied by the system to maintain the stability of what we've got. So the child's communication behaviors are controlled not by the child's psychology or but by the system in which the child is embedded.
The blood change.
What's that?
Like the reflection.
Okay. But so, yeah, shame stuff and your whole codependency movement is related to cybernetic understandings of people. So, so we look at organizational problems and we understand them in terms of systems of people that are behaving in all kinds of different ways to maintain something. And so when one person tries to change it, all kinds of other things happen to put them back in place and control it. So how do you change systems? That's what we did a whole course on. And we solved everything. And so now we're going to fix all the systems of the world. So, so we have cybernetics, then we have semiotics. We have semiotics, which has to do with symbols and visual. So this is a lot of fun. If you're a person who likes to look at magazine ads and figure them out, and look at movies and figure out stuff, this semiotics is great. Because when I was doing my graduate studies, our project in semiotics was to take a television commercial and take every frame or part and analyze the colors, the arrangement, the choice of people, things, objects, arrangement of the objects. Everything had meaning. Colors, arrangement, choices of people, everything carries meaning to a semiotician. So a semiotician would walk into this room and begin to read this room. They would look at the cement block walls, and that would communicate to them. That would explain to them something about the values of the university, and why isn't granite walls